The Lives of the Saints by the Reverend Alban Butler, taken from the 4th edition, published in 1954. May 28th. Saint Germanus, Confessor and Bishop of Paris. Saint Germanus, the glory of the Church of France in the 6th age, was born in the territory of Autun about the year 469. He was brought up in piety and learning under the care of Scapilian, his cousin, a holy priest. In his youth, no weather could divert him from always going to matins at midnight, though the church was above a mile from the place of his abode. Being ordained priest by St. Agrippinus, bishop of Autun, he was made abbot of St. Symphorians in the suburbs of that city, a house since converted into a priory of regular canons. Fortunatus, bishop of Poitiers, who was well acquainted with our saint, tells us that he was favored at that time with the gifts of miracles and prophecy. It was his custom to watch great part of the night in the church in prayer, whilst his monks slept. One night, in a dream, he thought a venerable old man presented him with the keys of the city of Paris, and said to him that God committed to his care the inhabitants of that city, that he should save them from perishing. 4 years after this divine admonition, in 554, happening to be in Paris, when that see became vacant on the demise of the Bishop Eusebius, he was exalted to the episcopal chair, though he endeavored by many tears to decline the charge. His promotion made no alteration in his continual fasts and other austerities, and the same simplicity and frugality appeared in his dress, table, and furniture. In the evening, at 9 o'clock, he went to the church and stayed there in prayer till after matins, that is, in summer, till about break of day. His house was perpetually crowded with the poor and the afflicted, and he had always many beggars at his own table, at which no dainty meats were ever served. He took care that the souls of his guests should be refreshed at the same time with their bodies by the reading of some pious book. God gave to his sermons a wonderful influence over the minds of all ranks of people, so that the face of the whole city was in a very short time quite changed. Vanities were abolished, dances and profane amusements laid aside, enmities and discord extinguished, and sinners reclaimed. King Childebert, who till then had been an ambitious worldly prince, by the sweetness and the powerful discourses of the saint, was entirely converted to piety, and by his advice reformed his whole court. And so desirous did that prince become of exchanging the perishing goods of this world for eternal treasures, that, not content with making many religious foundations to the nurseries of piety in all succeeding ages, and with sending incredible sums of money to the good bishop to be distributed among the indigent, after his coffers were drained, he melted down his silver plate, and gave away the chains which he wore about his neck, begging the bishop, whom he made the steward of his charities, never to cease giving, assuring him that on his side he should never be tired with supplying all things for the relief and comfort of the distressed. In the year 542, King Childebert, together with his brother Clotaire, making war in Spain, besieged Saragossa. The inhabitants in that city reposed a particular confidence in the patronage of St. Vincent, whose relics they carried in procession within sight of the French camp. King Childebert was moved with their devotion, and, desiring to speak with the bishop of the city, promised to withdraw his army on condition he might obtain some portion of the relics of St. Vincent. The bishop gave him the stole which that holy deacon wore at the altar, upon which the king raised the siege, and at his return to Paris built a church in honor of St. Vincent, and of the Holy Cross, which is now called St. Germain's in the Meadows, and stands in the suburbs of Paris. Childebert, falling sick at his palace at Salé, near Melun, at the confluence of the Yonne and Seine, St. Germanus paid him a visit, and when the physicians had in vain tried everything, all human means failing, the saint spent the whole night in prayer for his recovery, and in the morning laid his hands on him, and at the same moment the king found himself perfectly healed. The king relates himself this miracle in his letters patent, in which, in gratitude to God for this benefit, he gave to the Church of Paris and the Bishop Germanus the land of Salé, where he had received this favor. The good king did not long survive. As the king had chosen the church of St. Vincent for the place of his burial, the saint, assisted by 6 other bishops, performed the ceremony of the dedication on the 23rd of September, 558, the very day on which that prince died. The king likewise had built a large monastery joining to this church, when he endowed it most liberally with the fief of Issy and other lands, on part of which a considerable suburb of Paris has been since built. This magnificent edifice was called the Golden Church, the walls being covered on the outside with plates of brass gilt, and within adorned with paintings on a rich gilt ground. The church was plundered by the Normans in 845, 857, 858, and set on fire by them in 861 and 881, but rebuilt in 1014 and dedicated by Pope Alexander III in 1163. The lower part of the great tower and its gate, with the statues of Clovis, Clodomir, Thierry, Childebert, and his wife Oldrocota, Clotaire, and others, seem to be as old as the time of King Childebert. The prince committed the monastery and church to the care of our saint, who placed their monks under the holy abbot Drotovius, whom he invited from Autun, where he had formed him to a religious life. Clotaire, who succeeded his brother Childebert, was the last of the sons of the great Clovis, and united again the four kingdoms of France into one monarchy. On his removing from Soissons to Paris, he at first seemed to treat the holy bishop coldly, but falling ill soon after of a violent fever, was put in mind by some that were about him to send for St. Germanus. He did so, and full of confidence in the power of God and the sanctity of his servant, took hold of his clothes and applied them to the parts of his body where he felt pain, and recovered immediately. From that moment he always treated the saint even with greater honor than Childebert had done. But that prince dying shortly after, in 561, his four sons, Cheribert, Gontran, Sigibert, and Chilperic, divided the French monarchy into four kingdoms in the same manner as the sons of Clovis had done. That of Paris was given to Cheribert or Auribert. Gontran was king of Orleans and Burgundy, Sigibert of Austrasia, and Chilperic of Soissons. Cheribert sunk into a vicious indolence, yet was obstinate and headstrong in his passions. Not being divested of all the prejudices of paganism, he divorced his wife, Ingoberga, and took to wife Marcoversa, her maid, who had worn a religious habit. And after her death he married her sister, Merofleda, Ingoberga being still living. Our saint in many ways endeavored to make him sensible of the enormity of his crimes, but finding all his remonstrances lost on him, he proceeded to excommunicate him, and the accomplice of his sin, to hinder at least the dangerous influence of his scandalous example. The sinners were hardened in their evil courses, but God revenged the contempt of his laws and of the holy pastor, as he has often done by visible judgments. For the criminal lady fell ill and died in a few days, and the adulterous king did not long survive her, leaving by his lawful wife only 3 daughters, 2 of whom became nuns. The third, called Bertha, was married to Ethelbert, king of Kent. Upon the death of Cheribert in 570, his 3 brothers divided his dominions, but not being able to agree who should be master of Paris, the capital, came to an accommodation that they should hold it jointly, on condition that none of them should go into the city without leave of the other 2. St. Germanus found his flock involved by this agreement in great difficulties, and the city divided into 3 different parties, always plotting and counterplotting against one another. He did all that the most consummate charity, prudence, and vigilance could do to preserve the public peace. Yet Sigibert and Chilperic appeared in arms, being fired by ambition, and stirred up by their wicked queens, Fredegonda, wife of the latter, and Brunehaut of the former, burning with the most implacable jealousy against each other. The saint prevailed with them to suspend their hostilities for some time. At length Chilperic invaded the territories of Sigibert, but being worsted in battle, fled to Tournai. This victory left Sigibert free with liberty to go to Paris with his wife Brunehaut and children, where he was received as conqueror. St. Germanus wrote to the queen, conjuring her to employ her interest with her husband to restore the peace of France, and to spare the life and fortune of a brother whose ruin and blood would cry to heaven for vengeance. But Brunehaut's passion rendered her deaf to all remonstrances, and Sigibert was determined by her furious counsels to besiege Tournai. As he was setting out for this enterprise, he was met by St. Germanus, who told him that if he forgave his brother, he should return victorious, but if he was bent on his death, divine justice would overtake him, and his own death should prevent the execution of his unnatural design. Sigibert allowed this wholesome advice no weight, but the event showed that God had put these words into the mouth of the good bishop. For Queen Fredegonda, enraged at the desperate posture of her husband's affairs, hired 2 assassins who dispatched him with poisoned daggers, whilst he made a halt in his march at Vitry in 575, after he had reigned 14 years with some reputation of humanity, as Fortunatus tells us. Chilperic, by his tyranny and oppressions, deserved to be styled the French Nero, as St. Gregory of Tours calls him. He sacrificed his own children by former wives to the fury of Fredegonda, but having discovered her infidelity to him, he was, by her contrivance, murdered by her gallant in 584. Fredegonda was regent of the kingdoms of Soissons and Paris for her son Clotaire II, and continued her practices in wars against Brunehaut and her son till she died in 601. Brunehaut governed the kingdom of Austrasia for her son Childebert II, and, after his death, for her grandson Theodebert, but afterwards persuaded Theodoric, her second grandson, who reigned at Chalon, to destroy him and his whole family in 611. The year following, Theodoric died, and Clotaire II, surnamed the Great, son of Fredegonda, inheriting both her estates, accused Brunehaut before the states of putting to death 10 kings and St. Desiderius, bishop of Vienna, because he had reproved her for her public scandalous lusts and many other illustrious persons. She had at first appeared liberal and built several churches, but afterwards became infamous for her cruelty, avarice, restless ambition, and insatiable lusts, to which she sacrificed all things, and employed both the sword and poison in perpetrating her wicked designs. Being condemned by the states, she was put to the rack during 3 days, and afterwards dragged to death, being tied to the tail of a wild mare, or, according to others, drawn betwixt 4 horses in 613. St. Germanus lived not to see the miserable ends of these 2 firebrands of their country. In his old age he lost nothing of that zeal and activity with which he had fulfilled the great duties of his station in the vigor of his life. Nor did the weakness to which his corporeal austerities had reduced him make him abate anything in the mortification of his penitential life, in which he redoubled his fervor as he approached nearer to the end of his course. By his zeal the remains of idolatry were extirpated in France. In the Third Council of Paris in 557 he had the principal share in drawing up the canons. By his advice, King Childebert issued an edict commanding all idols to be destroyed throughout his dominions, and forbidding all indecent dances and diversions on Sundays and festivals. The saint continued his labors for the conversion of sinners, till he was called to receive the reward of them on the 28th of May, 576, being 80 years old. King Chilperic composed his epitaph, in which he extols his zeal for the salvation of his people and their affection and veneration for his person. He mentions the miracles which were wrought at his tomb, and says that sight was restored to the blind and speech to the dumb. He was, according to his own desire, buried in St. Symphorion's chapel, which he built at the bottom of the church of St. Vincent, already mentioned. Many miracles manifested his sanctity, of which Fortunatus, then a priest, afterwards Bishop of Poitiers, has left us a history, in which he gives 2 of his own evidence. Also 2 anonymous monks compiled relations of several miracles of St. Germanus, which Ammonius, a monk of his monastery, in 870, and a careful writer, digested into 2 books. The relics of St. Germanus remained in the aforesaid chapel in the year 754, when the abbot removed them into the body of the church. The ceremony of this translation was performed with great solemnity, and King Pepin thought himself honored by assisting at it. Prince Charles, known afterwards by the title of Charlemagne, who was then but 7 years old, attended his father on this occasion, and was so strongly affected with the miracles performed at that time, that when he came to the crown, he took a particular pleasure in relating them with all their circumstances. The characteristical virtue of St. Germanus was his unbounded charity to the poor. Liberality in alms moves God to be liberal to us in the dispensations of his spiritual graces, but he who hardens his heart to the injuries and wants of others shuts against himself the treasury of heaven.